Hey, Forsythe here. Niagara Falls is one of the most instantly recognizable and spectacular sights on the planet. A breathtaking natural wonder that's been captivating people for hundreds of years. Every second, over 3,000 tons of water thunders over the falls, generating enough energy to power millions of homes. It's actually a group of 3 waterfalls which straddle the border between the USA and Canada. They are situated on the Niagara River, which flows from Lake Erie into Lake Ontario. The largest of these waterfalls is the Horseshoe Falls, at a staggering 823 meters wide and 51 meters high, closely followed by the American Falls and, finally, the much smaller Bridal Veil Falls. It was formed over 12,000 years ago during the end of the last ice age, when the entire Niagara region was still covered in huge glaciers. As the ice age came to an end and the ice began to melt, the soil beneath eroded, forming vast basins. Over time, these filled with water, which inevitably overflowed, causing torrents of water to snake its way across the land, slowly but surely forming the Niagara River, and ultimately, the falls themselves. Now, if I ask you to stand on the precipice of one of these waterfalls and throw your fragile body into the vast watery abyss, just hoping you win Mother Nature's lottery and avoid snapping your neck on impact, miss all the jagged rocks, and somehow manage not to get dragged under and drowned, what would you say? Oh, what's that? No? I really thought you were going to go for yes there. But in 1829, that's sort of what happened, when a man named Sam Patch jumped into the Niagara River below. Sam Patch, who took the moniker of the Yankee Leaper, was the first American daredevil. He'd spent his life leaping off increasingly taller waterfalls in front of pensive crowds. And what could be a greater prize than the granddaddy of waterfalls in North America, Niagara Falls? Although it wasn't quite as impressive as it sounds, Patch didn't jump from the top of one of the falls, but from a 25-meter tall ladder erected at the base of Goat Island in the middle of the river. This was still an impressive feat, mind you, and he repeated it again a few months later, but from a higher elevation of 36 meters, to the marvel of 10,000 onlookers. Unfortunately, Patch had little time to enjoy his newfound fame. Barely a month later, he died whilst attempting a similar jump into the Genesee River in New York. But Patch wasn't the first person to realise that chucking stuff off waterfalls can draw a large crowd. 2 years before he arrived at the falls, an eccentric hotel proprietor by the name of William Forsythe managed to attract his own crowd of 10,000 curious folk without even having to get his feet wet. You see, in order to gain the upper hand in the competitive Niagara hotel trade, Forsythe wanted to advertise his Pavilion Hotel in a way that would guarantee widespread notoriety. His idea was pretty simple and also a bit bonkers. He purchased an old boat and decorated it to look like a pirate ship. He even filled it with a crew of mannequins, all dressed up in the kind of threads that Blackbeard himself would be proud of. Once the pirate ship was ready, it was floated downstream and over the falls for the entertainment of the crowd. A bit mental, sure, but it sounds pretty entertaining, right? I'd pay to see that. But Forsythe wasn't finished yet. To add another layer of excitement to this eccentric pie, he filled his pirate ship with a menagerie of live animals. A buffalo, a dog, 2 raccoons, 2 foxes, 2 bears, 15 geese, and an eagle, to be exact. Yeah, I'm not sure how those poor animals felt about this arrangement. The crowd watched on curiously as the animal-filled pirate ship floated itself downstream towards its watery fate. However, before it arrived at the drop, the bears managed to escape and swim to safety. The others wouldn't be so lucky, and all but one seemingly invincible goose perished at the foot of the falls. This technically made it the first documented living creature to have survived a trip over Niagara Falls. Unfortunately, you won't find its goosey face in any of the record books. But you will find the face of Annie Edson Taylor, a 63-year-old school teacher who, by 1901, had apparently become bored of teaching general arithmetic to unruly school kids, and decided she wanted to become the first person to go over Niagara Falls and survive. To be fair to Annie, if I spent 10 minutes trying to teach maths to a room of 10-year-olds, I'd throw myself off a waterfall. To maximise her chances of survival, Annie thought it prudent to bundle herself into a wooden barrel. To be fair, it was a pimped-out barrel, custom-made for the job at hand, constructed of oak, reinforced with iron hoops, and padded with a mattress. Before Taylor herself attempted the stunt, the barrel was rigorously tested in a series of high-tech safety experiments, and it emerged with a 5-star NCAP safety rating. Actually, that's not true at all. They just sent it over the falls with a cat inside to see if it would survive, which, thankfully, it did. Although it did have a bleeding head, which would set alarm bells ringing for me, but not for Annie. So, now that it was Kitty approved, it was Annie's turn to attempt the feat. She climbed inside with her lucky heart-shaped pillow in hand. The barrel was plugged up and thrown into a rowboat, which took her to the centre of the river before being set adrift towards the mighty Horseshoe Falls and finally plunging her way into the history books. Despite a small head wound, Taylor was pulled from the barrel mostly unscathed. Although she would later tell the press, "I would sooner walk up to the mouth of a cannon, knowing it was going to blow me to pieces, than make another trip over the falls." She'd hoped fame and fortune would be awaiting her. Making money was the reason she'd decided to do this crazy stunt in the first place, but it never materialized. And despite going down in history as the first person to intentionally go over Niagara Falls and survive, she would live out her days in poverty. It would be another decade before someone else attempted to repeat Taylor's stunt. This time, it was a circus performer by the name of Bobby Leech. Bobby Leech was a bit of a regular at Niagara. He'd already performed a 63-metre high dive into the river, and tried and failed to traverse the rapids. And now he'd turned his attention to the falls themselves, bragging to local residents that anything a 63-year-old schoolteacher could do, he could do better. In spite of his confidence, he didn't better Taylor's plunge. Although Leech survived, he came away with 2 broken kneecaps, a few broken ribs, and a fractured jaw. But only 15 years later, this brave titan of the falls died in the most embarrassing way. He slipped on an orange peel. Other daredevils have taken to the skies above Niagara to prove their mettle. Many tightrope walkers have descended upon, or should that be ascended upon? Anyway, upon Niagara, in the hope of walking the full width of the falls without falling in. The most famous of them being the funambulist Charles Blondin, who, in 1859, executed a series of daring tightrope walks across the Niagara Gorge in front of 25,000 onlookers. By the way, you may assume, like I did, that a funambulist is someone who inappropriately fondles ambulances. No? Just me. But it's actually the proper name for a tightrope walker, derived from the Latin word funis, meaning rope, and ambulare, meaning to walk. But sure enough, ambulare is also where we derive the word ambulance from. Hôpital ambulant being the 19th century French name for a mobile hospital. But anyway, back at Niagara Falls, somebody who was desperately hoping to avoid the need for an ambulance was Charles Blondin. Not content with merely funambuling his way across the river on a rope suspended 50 meters in the air, which if you ask me is already pretty impressive, Blondin upped the difficulty level of each walk with a series of increasingly ambitious theatrical stunts. These included wearing a blindfold, pushing a wheelbarrow, wearing stilts, and at one point, stopping in the middle to cook and eat an omelette. He even completed the walk whilst carrying his manager on his back. Now, if that doesn't demonstrate faith in your employee's abilities, then I don't know what does. Blondin was already a megastar of his day, but his famous tightrope walks across the Niagara Gorge only helped to boost his fame even further. And if you ever find yourself in London, be sure to look out for Blondin Avenue and Niagara Avenue, both named in honour of Blondin and his heroics. Of course, not all stunts at Niagara have ended in celebration. In 1883, the Englishman Matthew Webb attempted to swim through the dangerous and unpredictable Niagara whirlpool, a feat that nobody had dared attempt before, and for good reason. The whirlpool is one of the largest of its type in the world, at over 1,000 feet wide and 120 feet deep. But Webb was no ordinary swimmer. In 1875, he'd become the first person in recorded history to swim the English Channel without use of artificial aids, a swim that had taken him an exhausting 22 hours. Unfortunately, despite his pedigree, he proved no match for the mighty Niagara whirlpool. Webb was sucked into the vortex and pulled beneath the surface. His mangled body was found 4 days later, washed up downstream. Since Annie Edson Taylor first took the plunge at the beginning of the 20th century, a total of 13 people have attempted to beat the falls, with 9 of them living to tell the tale. In 1951, the Niagara authorities decided it was probably a good idea to stop people profiting from going over the falls, and so it was made illegal. This meant the glory days of huge crowds gathering to watch someone quite literally risking life and limb were over. However, this didn't stop the occasional unlicensed attempt. Take Jesse Sharp, for instance, who, in 1990, went over the falls in a kayak. He was so confident he'd survive that he'd made dinner reservations at a restaurant downriver. Unfortunately, but unsurprisingly, it was a reservation that he was unable to keep, due to him being dead. Today, Niagara Falls remains a hugely popular tourist hotspot. Each year, millions of people arrive from all corners of the globe to gaze upon this gargantuan curtain of water and witness its breathtaking power. But one day this geological wonder will cease to exist. You see, the three waterfalls are eroding at a rate of around 30 centimeters a year, and it's estimated that they are now 7 miles upstream from their original position. Efforts have been made to slow this process, with underwater tunnels being constructed to divert the most damaging currents away from the falls. And in 1969, a temporary dam was built upriver to drain the falls completely so that weak points could be located and strengthened. In spite of these efforts, very little can stand in the way of Mother Nature, and Niagara Falls will one day merge into Lake Erie before disappearing completely. But before you start panicking about not being able to complete that bucket list of yours, I should point out that this won't happen for at least another 20,000 years. Which should give you plenty of time to save up a bit of spending money and maybe even treat yourself to a state-of-the-art reinforced wooden barrel whilst you're there. Just don't do anything stupid with it. Thanks for watching. Check out my new podcast, Random Interesting Facts, available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Link in the description below. Thanks.